This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. The African Union sees hopes of dialogue in Ethiopia, even as the UN warns the threat of civil war is only too real. Poland deploys thousands of guards on the border with Belarus as tensions over migrants rise. And investigators begin criminal probe into a Texas concert stampede that left 8 people dead. Let's begin the hour with the latest on the conflict in Ethiopia. The African Union High Representative for the Horn of Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo, says that both sides in the conflict have indicated their willingness to give dialogue a chance. In his briefing to the UN Security Council on Monday, Obasanjo said that he hoped to have a program within a week that would guide all sides on how they could achieve humanitarian access and a withdrawal of troops to their satisfaction. Meanwhile, the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, says the conflict has reached disastrous proportions. DiCarlo says the fighting in Ethiopia could bring about a humanitarian catastrophe.
It's a summary to our discussions. All these leaders here in Addis Ababa and in the north agree individually that the difference between them are political and require political solution through dialogue. This, therefore, constitutes a window of opportunity that we can collectively tap into to assist the people of Ethiopia to find lasting solution to the ongoing crisis. It is, however, important to mention the window of opportunity we have is very little and that the time is short for any intervention in this regard.
In a country of over 110 million people, over 90 different ethnic groups, and 80 languages, no one can predict what continued fighting and insecurity will bring. But let me be clear. What is certain is that the risk of Ethiopia descending into a widening civil war is only too real. That would bring about a humanitarian catastrophe and consume the future of such an important country. The political repercussions of intensifying violence in the wider region would be immense, compounding the many crises besetting the Horn of Africa.
We will have more in-depth coverage on that story very shortly in Africa Live, which is coming up in the next few minutes. Well, Poland has deployed more than 12,000 guards to its border in an effort to stop migrants from crossing illegally. The government says 3,000 people are near the border with Belarus, with another 10,000 waiting to enter. Lithuania and Latvia have also reported an increase of people entering illegally in recent months. The European Union accuses Minsk of flying in migrants from the Middle East and Africa to overwhelm the bloc as retaliation for sanctions. Belarus denies the accusations. Well, we head over to the U.S. now, where investigators are pursuing a criminal probe into a deadly stampede at a concert in Houston, Texas. 8 people were killed, most of them college and high school students. Tony Waterman has more.
Attention is now turned to the planning of this concert. Investigators want to see the security plans, the site plans, the emergency plans that were all put together ahead of this concert. These are plans that are meant to prevent these types of tragic events from occurring, and if one does happen, to then minimize the damage. Now, it is possible that these plans were either inadequate or perhaps not followed as closely as they should have been, but clearly there was a crowd control problem that arose. Many concert goers have been sharing their very raw and emotional stories, saying that they were fighting for their survival as this 50,000 person crowd stormed towards the stage that Travis Scott was performing on, many of them saying they were struggling just to breathe. Police are also investigating unconfirmed reports that there was someone in the audience that was injecting drugs into people, seemingly at random, one of those people being a security officer who had to be revived using an anti-overdose medication. At this point, though, nearly all of the 8 victims have been identified. This includes 14-year-old John Hilgert. He was there with one of his friends celebrating a birthday. He got there early to ensure that he got a very close spot to the stage. Also, 16-year-old Brianna Rodriguez, who her family says was passionate about dancing. We've also now had the first funeral for 27-year-old Danish Beg, his family saying that he died protecting his fiance.
My brother was trying to save her, and he did. He saved her, and it cost him his life.
We've also now seen at least one civil suit that has been filed. A man who said that he had suffered serious injuries at this concert. He's seeking $1 million in damages from defendants, including Travis Scott himself and also the show's producer, Live Nation. This is expected to be the first civil suit of many to come. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
Well, eager travelers and their relatives are rejoicing news of the U.S. reopening its borders to vaccinated visitors. This ends a 20-month spell of COVID-19 restrictions that separated families, halted tourism, and strained diplomatic ties. Jim Spellman has some touching moments for us from an airport outside the nation's capital.
After more than a year and a half, fully vaccinated travelers from the UK, Europe, China, India, Brazil, and other countries will be allowed to enter the United States.
Excited. It's been a long time, so I think mostly relieved that we have a concrete date, so very happy.
Travelers must provide proof they've been vaccinated with a jab approved by the U.S. FDA or the WHO. China's vaccines from Sinovac and Sinopharm are on the list, but the Sputnik V vaccine developed in Russia is not. Travelers must also have a negative COVID-19 test taken within 3 days of travel.
We've just been waiting with bated breath, and then suddenly the announcement came, and yeah, so happy to be getting back to it. For me, it's my first time to the US, so really excited.
There are a few exemptions. Children under 18 don't need to be vaccinated, but nearly everyone else will have to meet these standards. Airlines say there is pent-up demand.
So when the Biden administration announced that the U.S. border will be opened, we saw a 600% increase.
The Biden administration has been working directly with airlines to prepare for the rush of passengers. Still, travelers should be prepared for long lines at customs and immigration here in the United States. But many say it's worth it, including Faiza Ramon, who came to Dulles Airport outside Washington to meet her nephew.
He doesn't have a father. My brother died when he was a year and a half, and I'm practically his mother.
The wait goes on, and then the reunion.
You're on camera.
You can call on FaceTime and stuff like this, but personally, yeah, it's better.
And for travelers like Rukia Shaka, it's been way too long away from that special someone. Tell me what you're going to do.
See friends and family, actually. Yeah. Oh my god, we're going to be on TV. Stop. I missed you too. Yeah, so this is the reason I came here.
A reunion
Yes.
worth the wait, but one they hope they never have to repeat again. Jim Spellman, CGTN, at Dulles Airport outside Washington.
The UK says that it will recognize COVID-19 vaccines in the World Health Organization's emergency use list later this month. The country will add China's Sinovac and Sinopharm to its approved list of vaccines for inbound travelers. The move comes into effect from November the 22nd and will benefit fully vaccinated people from countries including the UAE and Malaysia. India's Covaxin will also be added to the list. Well, let's head over to Shanghai. The China Global Trade Expo is in full swing. CGTN's Chen Tong reports from the Food and Agriculture Products Pavilion.
So the biggest number of exhibitors this year is in the food and agriculture section. And don't be jealous, I'm going to try some yummies for you. And first of all, let me have my guest, Gary Zhao, Marketing Director from V2 Food.
Hi,
so,
nice to meet you.
Gary, what you have for me?
Yeah, I will help you to try the V2 plant-based burger. Do you want to have a try?
Yes, so plant-based burger.
Have a try.
So let me try first. Well, I love it.
So V2's mission is to deliver the tasty and healthy foods with a more sustainable way. So now we are in China. We are targeting meat eaters who concerns health and eco-friendly issues, and then also want to enjoy the real taste of meat.
Well, before I go, I have some figures to share with you. In the year of 2020, China imported fruits worth $8.4 billion, a year-on-year increase of 30%. And we know the regional comprehensive economic partnership is expected to be enforced next year. So with the RCEP being enforced, I think the market of imported fruits and food in China is expected to get more fierce.
Well, the Expo's medical pavilion has seen agreements signed there almost every other hour. We spoke with several exhibitors and purchasers who inked deals at the Expo.
We have about 70 different products, of which 20 are brand new products this year. We will sign more than a dozen different agreements with our key partners. Bring this technology into the markets so that it can advance the 2030 Healthy China goals much faster.
Yes, we just signed an agreement with Mindray, which is a leading Chinese publicly traded company in the medical device space, to bring our FlowTrack critical care technology to more Chinese patients.
This technology is an urgent need for Chinese customers when Mindray need their support for our core technologies. This collaboration can greatly improve our competitiveness.
We have signed 10 collaboration agreements in this CIIE together with this innovative local company in their scientific area. We jointly pool our resources and expertise to expedite all this research development.
Well, 4 astronauts have returned safely to Earth aboard the Endeavour SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. The autonomously operated vehicle parachuted down into the Gulf of Mexico late on Monday evening. The crew were conducting a 6-month NASA science mission aboard the International Space Station. The spacecraft began its 8-hour return voyage earlier in the day with a 90-minute flight around the ISS. Well, Pakistan has announced a month-long ceasefire with local Taliban militants. Both sides are expected to continue talks with the possibility the truce could be extended. The Pakistani Taliban have fought for years to overthrow the government in Islamabad. The group has been responsible for multiple attacks over the past 14 years, killing thousands of soldiers and civilians. Past attempts at peace failed, but officials say the Taliban in Afghanistan helped facilitate the ceasefire after its victory in August. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in a bit.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The African Union sees hopes of dialogue in Ethiopia, even as the UN warns the threat of civil war is only too real. Mass burial held for victims of the Sierra Leone tanker tragedy as death toll climbs to 115. A campaign to return Africa's looted artifacts is gathering pace, but what does it all mean? An expert weighs in. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, Kenya suspends listing of some loan defaulters with the Credit Reference Bureau. And in sport, the winners of the New York Marathon savor the taste of victory. We continue with our coverage on Ethiopia, and world leaders are concerned that time is running out to stop the fighting in Ethiopia. Officials from the African Union and the United States had said on Monday that there was still a small window of opportunity to end the violence. The United Nations warns that Ethiopia is in danger of descending further into a civil war. An envoy from the U.S. has returned to Addis Ababa for talks with an envoy from the African Union. The AU has been meeting with anti-government groups to try to de-escalate tensions by the end of the week. Sarah Walton has more.
Monday's emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the situation in Ethiopia was pushed back from Friday after negotiations on a joint statement to condemn fighting in the country delayed proceedings. Today, the UN Security Council was briefed on the current situation in Tigray, where fighting between anti-government groups and federal troops has now been going on for more than a year. The UN's Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs told the meeting that the conflict has reached disastrous proportions and that the fighting places the future of the country and its people, as well as the stability of the wider Horn of African region, in grave uncertainty.
The risk of Ethiopia descending into a widening civil war is only too real. That would bring about a humanitarian catastrophe and consume the future of such an important country.
The Security Council also received a briefing from the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, who is now the African Union's representative for the Horn of Africa. He recently visited Tigray, and on Tuesday he'll travel to the surrounding areas of Amhara and Afar to meet with anti-government groups to discuss humanitarian access and the withdrawal of troops. He said he hoped to have a plan of action for that by the end of the week. During the debate that followed, the representatives for the US and Ireland welcomed the joint statement released on Friday, but said the Security Council had remained silent for too long as fighting intensified in the country. Meanwhile, China's representative at the UN, Ambassador Zhang Jun, backed demands for an immediate end to hostilities and called for the African Union to be given time and space to carry out its diplomatic efforts. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
In his briefings, the Security Council African Union High Representative for the Horn of Africa and former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo said that both sides had shown willingness to hold ceasefire talks.
As a summary to our discussions, all these leaders here in Addis Ababa and in the north agree individually that the difference between them are political and require political solution through dialogue. This, therefore, constitutes a window of opportunity that we can collectively tap into to assist the people of Ethiopia to find lasting solution to the ongoing crisis. It is, however, important to mention the window of opportunity we have is very little and that the time is short for any intervention in this regard.
Well, the African Union is calling for an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities in Ethiopia. It's urging the federal government of Ethiopia and all other relevant parties to the conflict to engage in meaningful and genuine dialogue. The AU Peace and Security Council convened an emergency session to discuss an update to the conflict in Ethiopia's north. Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
The African Union High Representative for the Horn of Africa, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, has presented a report to the African Union Peace and Security Council on the conflict in Ethiopia. He says he has met with both Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the leadership of the Tigray People's Liberation Front to push for a peaceful reconciliation to the protracted conflict in the country's north. And he is asking the international community to rally behind the AU-led process to strengthen the peacemaking efforts. The AU Peace and Security Council says there will be no military solution to this crisis and has condemned all forms of hate speech and incitement to hatred, violence and discrimination. The continental body is concerned that the ongoing conflict continues to worsen an already dire humanitarian situation in the country's north. The United Nations has estimated that 7 million people have been forced to depend on humanitarian assistance for slightly over a year. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian Air Force has targeted new areas in the north that it claims are training grounds and logistics centers for the TPLF. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, CGTN's Guram Chalana joins us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Hi, Guram. Good to see you. The African Union envoy for the Horn of Africa and former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo is saying that by the end of the week, he hopes to have a plan of action on improving humanitarian access and withdrawal of troops agreeable to all parties. Guram, what more do you have for us on that?
So, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, a respected politician and a diplomat in the continent, has been here in Addis Ababa for the last few days. He has also met Ethiopian higher officials, including the Prime Minister himself, reportedly. And also, he went all the way to Mekelle as he was allowed by the federal government to meet TPLF leadership. After that, he also reported for the African Union Peace and Security Council, which he recommended what you have already said of seeing light at the end of a tunnel in general terms. But he's saying that, first of all, the cessation of hostilities is what he's expecting as soon as possible to happen. And then also unfettered humanitarian access for the people who are affected by the ongoing war. At the same time, negotiations, discussions, and peaceful resolution of this conflict should begin, and this should be done without any preconditions. So President Obasanjo is now going to go around other regional states. He has already been in the Oromia regional state, one of the largest regions in the country, and Afar as well. And so he's going to be also in the Amhara regional state to find out what is really happening so that he can have the know-how of what's happening.
Gary, we've also heard that the UN's Under Secretary General for Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, is saying the threat of civil war is only too real in Ethiopia. How are authorities there reacting to these concerns?
Well, this concern is a concern not only for higher officials, but also for citizens across the country, because Ethiopians, if you've seen over the last few days, have been on the streets, squares, and asking for solidarity with one another so that they can protect the sovereignty of the country, and they are being enlisted at the same time. But then again, people also tell you that war is not the solution for the problem that is happening at the moment. If there is a peaceful resolution of the conflict that's happening in the country, yes, we need that. Remember, Ethiopia has seen several civil wars over the last 40 years. And the last thing people want in this country, to be honest with you, is to see yet another civil war in this nation. This war happening is not happening between foreign enemies. It's happening between brothers and sisters. That's what people are saying, and they want it to stop. So there is concern from authorities' side at the same time. But remember, this is a complicated matter, and we hope a resolution will come, especially when it comes to solving it peacefully from the African Union's effort. But we have to wait and see if that's going to happen or not soon.
Guram, thank you so much for that update. Guram Chala speaking to us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Let's head over to Sudan now, where the military leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has promised he will not hold a government position in the upcoming July 2023 elections. General Burhan made the statement weeks after he'd collapsed a transitional government in a military takeover. Speaking in Khartoum, the military leader expressed his commitment to a peaceful transition and election.
We will be committed to handing over power to a civilian government of qualified, independent and national competencies. We're also committed to ensuring no interference or hindrance in the transfer of power.
Weeks ago, dissolving the government and detaining top officials, including the Prime Minister. The move sparked violent nationwide protests, with at least 14 demonstrators reportedly killed. The army has denied responsibility for the deaths and stressed that it remains focused on the transition. The military takeover drew international anger, with the Arab League, United Nations, and African Union all demanding a return to civilian rule. Let's head over to Niger now, where a fire tore through a school in southern Niger, killing dozens of children. At least 26 students died after their straw hut classrooms caught fire Monday morning in Maradi. Several others were injured. Most of the victims were 5 or 6 years old. The government has declared 3 days of national mourning. Niger often builds overflow classrooms made of straw and wood to ease a shortage of schools. Fires are common but rarely result in casualties. But some 20 children died in a similar fire in Niger earlier this year. The government says that the straw classrooms would now be banned across the country. In Sierra Leone, hundreds of people gathered at a cemetery on the outskirts of Freetown for the mass burial of those who died after a fuel tanker exploded. Medical workers in protective suits carried flag-draped coffins. Victims included people who had flocked to collect fuel leaking from the ruptured tanker. The fuel tanker exploded following a collision in a suburb of Freetown on Friday. Hundreds of people were injured in the blast. The death toll from that accident has risen to at least 115 people.
For us, a huge loss of life. As His Excellency said, it is a difficult time for everybody who have relatives. Some people don't even know that their relatives are dead, and some of them, coming burying burnt without recognition. You can't recognize them, and so it's a really difficult time. Over 100 people have died here. We're burying like 76 of these people. Some have been taken by the relatives who recognize them. Some have died in the hospital and have been taken by the relatives. So it's a real sad time, and hard and difficult for many people, including me.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More on Africa Live, including a campaign to return Africa's looted artifacts is gathering pace, but what does it all mean? An expert weighs in. We'll look at the ongoing UN Climate Summit, where many contentious issues remain unresolved.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, a major meeting is underway in Beijing of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. It's the highest authority of the party when the National Congress is not in session, convening several times during its 5-year term to make decisions and policies. CGTN's Gao Yiming explains how the sessions operate.
The CPC's National Congress is the highest body of China's ruling party. It's held once every 5 years, and is convened by the party's Central Committee. The Central Committee holds a plenary or full session every year, and up to 7 of them within its 5-year term. These sessions are convened by the Central Committee's Political Bureau. Around 2,000 delegates attend the week-long session of National Congress. They elect a new Central Committee and discuss major issues within the party. A plenary session is attended by hundreds of the full members and alternate members. Normally, the very first plenary session will elect the Political Bureau and its standing committee, as well as the General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee. The following 6 sessions focus on other issues, including appointment of leaders of national organs, agricultural development, economic plans, and reform.
The plenary session comes as the CPC marks its centenary this year. The session is expected to deliberate a resolution which will look back at the party's major achievements and experience of the past 100 years. Dr. Robert Lawrence Kuhn, chairman of the Kuhn Foundation and its CGTN columnist, now speaks about the deeper message behind the meeting.
The party sees itself. This 6th plenum stands at the new historical starting point of the 2nd centenary goal: to transform China into a fully modernized socialist nation by the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China in 2049. And this 6th plenum is said to be motivated by 3 deep understandings: historical context, learning the present and enlightening the future, and serving and satisfying the people. The 6th plenum holds up the banner, as they like to say, of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which requires strengthening the 4 consciousnesses, fortifying the 4 self-confidences, and achieving the 2 safeguards, thus ensuring that the whole party moves forward in unison. To foreigners, all this language may sound turgid, repetitive, generalized, party speak of little consequence. To China watchers, the semiotics are clear, strengthening the leadership of the CPC. To appreciate the deep message of the 6th plenum, we look to party history. There have only been 2 prior resolutions on history. In 1945, the first resolution ensured Mao Zedong's firm control as absolute leader. In 1981, the second resolution confirmed support for Deng Xiaoping and his reform and opening up policy. From the party's perspective, both of these prior resolutions unified thinking and gathered strength to complete new historical tasks, which is exactly what the party expects from the 6th plenum under CPC General Secretary Xi Jinping. Now, for the party's 3rd resolution on history, the parallelisms are striking, consolidating the party under its core leader to commence a 3rd new era. For Xi's era, China becomes strong.
Well, in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to meet Benin's President Patrice Talon. The meeting is to formally sign the transfer treaty that will allow 26 looted royal treasures to be returned to Benin. The works will be transported to Cotonou and be shown to the public there. The art pieces were looted following the war fought by France against the Kingdom of Dahomey in 1892. The looted artifacts have been on display in French museums since 1900. They are to be returned to Benin in the course of the week. Let's continue with that conversation. It's reported that up to 90% of sub-Saharan Africa's material cultural legacy is outside the continent. This includes artifacts. One report estimates that the number of such materials stolen from Africa in some of Europe's top museums reaches to up to 431,000 various elements of African cultural heritage. Joining us for what the return of these items means for the continent, we're joined by Olojo Kosoka, the chairman of the Society of Nigerian Artists. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a long-standing campaign from various African countries wanting artifacts that have been stolen from them to be returned home. What does this latest development of France returning certain items mean for that campaign for Africa and especially for Benin?
Yes, it is a welcome idea from for France to make gesture to return some of these artifacts, because it is going to bring about a reunion between the countries. Because when you look at about the 26 artifacts that are being returned now, or that will be returned now, it will afford the natives the opportunity to really interact with the culture of their people, to really look in time and look at what their ancestors had produced in the past. So it is a welcome idea, and we hope that this gesture, you understand, is total in such a way that all the looted treasures around Africa should be returned back to their original place of produce, so that the present generation and the coming generation will have the opportunity to have this sense of belonging and to know what it used to be in the past.
Olojo, so what we know is that there remains thousands of various other stolen artifacts that rightfully belong to Africa, but are displayed in museums outside the continent. What kind of recourse is available that you know of to African countries to have these items returned to the continent?
I can't get you, ma'am.
I just wanted us to speak about that there's still thousands of items that are still not on the African continent. They're still in other places that have to be returned. And I was just asking you about what kind of recourse that you know of that African countries have to have those items returned back to Africa.
So we are still going to, the only thing we can do now is to continue to request and to make advocacy, you understand, for some of these artifacts, some of these materials, some of this lost culture to be returned to the people, so that historically we can be guided and really know the identity of our people, so that we can know where we are coming from and where we are going. So we will continue to advocate, we will continue to make that request in such a way that we will have a good cultural relationship between these countries.
Thank you so much for joining us, Olojo Kosoka, the chairman of the Society of Nigerian Artists. Well, after a week of UN climate talks in Glasgow, many contentious issues are still unresolved. Meanwhile, scientists say global warming is already putting the vulnerable even more at risk. Nawi Jabrakil has the latest.
The Global Climate Change Summit has entered its second week, and after a quiet Sunday, it's back to business at COP26. The world leaders have gone, but thousands of delegates are still working out finer details in the hope of securing an agreement for the planet's future. But experts are warning the impact of global warming is already hitting some harder than others.
I mean, climate change unfortunately has progressed so much that the impacts are being felt today, every day, everywhere basically. But the developing countries in particular, the poorest and most vulnerable people there, face these impacts very immediately and are already suffering from that.
However, Glasgow is still attracting some star power. Former US President Barack Obama arrived to cheers. His message, a similar one we've been hearing: act now before it's too late.
This is not something that's 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. This is now, and we have to act now to help with adaptation and resilience, which I know is a theme of COP26.
Like the familiar rhetoric, there are the familiar complaints. Poorer countries want richer ones to meet a previous pledge to offer $100 billion to help them deal with climate change. The foreign minister of Tuvalu using an unconventional setting for his recorded speech to the summit, highlighting the threat faced by island nations.
Even with the pledges announced here so far, the world is likely to miss the target of keeping global warming at 1.5 degrees, which was a main aim of this summit. It means stronger action will be needed, and with the deadline of Friday to wrap up these talks, every minute will matter. Nawi Jabakil, CGTN, Glasgow.
Well, world leaders have been discussing ways to mitigate climate change, which is already affecting communities worldwide. But some traditional communities may have already been coping with these changes by relying purely on their indigenous knowledge. But how relevant is this traditional information in the face of the changing climate? CGTN's Penina Karibe visited a Maasai community in Kenya's Kajiado County and now reports.
Blistering morning sun reflects brightly on the bare landscape. On the ground, a vastness of bare earth stretches out endlessly. This is Kajiado County. Known as a semi-arid region, it has not received much rain this year and is currently experiencing drought. Kajiado County is known for pastoralism. In this harsh weather, goats roam freely looking for something, anything to eat. The Maasai community, which is predominant in this region, has learned to survive in this harsh environment. It is here that we find John Waupari, one of the Maasai elders, as he heads to meet with other elders at the home of the former area chief. The elders are also joined by meteorologist John Rotich, who is the county's director of meteorological services. The discussion that follows next is both interesting and intriguing. They are comparing notes on the weather forecasts from the elders and the meteorological department. Each side gives details of what they have studied and what the findings are. The outcomes of this discussion will prove crucial to the community's next steps in the coming days and weeks. But the elders are optimistic. After almost a year of no rain, relief is coming and coming soon. How they're able to tell that is a different kind of science, studied for centuries. A science that uses everything in the surrounding environment, from the sky to animals and even plants.
This is an indicator the rains are near. You can't see these leaves any other time except when the rains are approaching. It might rain a week or two from now.
In this land, almost every plant has a story to tell. John says these tiny shrubs only sprout a few weeks before the onset of rains. They also observe flowers from different trees, when they bloom and the different colors they have, all of which are useful in determining the weather patterns. Animals too are a useful resource of climate prediction. The elders slaughter a goat and study the insides of its stomach. The patterns of the veins and blood flow determines if they will have a good or bad season. And then there are the tiny creatures such as termites, which are useful in giving more immediate forecasts, narrowing it down to days. John explains that patterns such as these tiny termite mounds above the ground are a good indication that the area will receive rains in just a few days.
We also study the stars. Every morning and evening the elders study them. There are two stars in particular that we study, and depending on their movement, we are able to determine how weather will be. It will be 2 years now since we last saw them, but of late we've been spotting them. They are moving towards each other, and as soon as they cross each other, it will rain.
It may not sound like much compared to complex scientific instruments that are currently used globally, but such is the trust in this indigenous knowledge that the Maasai community has clung to it over the years.
My father died recently. He was 100 years old when he died. So he had a lot of knowledge and he would teach me how to apply it in order for me to be able to care for the animals better, to know if it will rain and also when there will be a drought.
And meetings such as this one ensure that knowledge is passed on to the younger generation. It is difficult to imagine any accurate weather forecasts could be made using the natural flora and fauna of such a harsh environment. But this knowledge has sustained the local communities. It has also piqued the interest of the country's meteorological department. With technology becoming more advanced and widespread, some scientists insist indigenous knowledge still has its place in climate prediction and adaptation.
We also add, or we incorporate that knowledge, the skills they have, and the network they have, so that the two knowledges, they can be acceptable and they can penetrate, and the user can get a better use and also get more knowledge or more parameters which are incorporated, like rainfall amounts, rainfall duration, rainfall onset, and the cessation of the rains.
It is the reason why Kenya's meteorological department is collaborating with local community elders, such as these ones, to ensure such communities are cushioned against the effects of the constantly changing climate. But that collaboration has taken years to nurture.
Hawa watu wa science
Scientists don't listen to us. They dismiss us and they say we don't know anything. They think because they are educated, their instruments are better than our knowledge. If only they could collaborate with us, we would also be able to contribute to their knowledge.
Scientists like Rotich say, in the face of the changing climate, this indigenous knowledge cannot be ignored.
So going into the future, they are good in adaptation. They can teach us what the traditional knowledge knows about how to live in a harsher environment.
With the world scrambling for solutions to change the current climate cause, Kajiado County's Maasai community may already be contributing to that cause in their own small way. Penina Karibe, CGTN, in Kajiado County, Kenya.
Well, here's what's coming up when we return from the break. In business news, Kenya suspends listing of some loan defaulters with the Credit Reference Bureau. And Nigeria boosts its economic ties with Cote d'Ivoire.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for the day's business news. The Central Bank of Kenya has announced the suspension of Credit Reference Bureau listing loan defaulters owing $45,000 and below for the period between the 1st of October 2021 to the 30th of September 2022. This follows a directive by President Uhuru Kenyatta 2 weeks ago. Borrowers defaulting on loans of less than $45,000 will not be blacklisted at credit reference bureaus, while those already blacklisted will be dropped. The CRB listing relief is part of a stimulus package to cushion distressed businesses and families from the effects of COVID-19, which have hit consumer demand and forced businesses to shed jobs and cut back on their operations. Tunisian President Kais Saied has called on the new government led by Prime Minister Najla Bouden to reassure Tunisians on the current economic situation and streamline public spending. Adin Shiwashi has that report.
The head of state was categorical that the current economic and social situation is difficult. However, he noted that the crisis can be overcome through the combined efforts of all national stakeholders.
We are discussing the economic and social situation, but especially the financial situation of the country. There is a crisis, no one can doubt that. Hopefully, we'll overcome this crisis with hard work. We'll also involve all citizens in this process to end the crisis.
The governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia said the country is facing an unprecedented economic crisis. He explained that the situation has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
This period is difficult, but all countries experienced a crisis in 2020. The impact of the pandemic was hard on Tunisia. We lost more than 9% of GDP. Tunisia's economic actors behaved in a heroic way on all levels. Despite the extreme conditions, we ended the year with less than 3% of GDP. The upcoming period will be much better.
El Abbasi noted that the IMF staff and the Tunisian authorities held technical discussions last week on the review of economic and monetary developments in the North African country.
Over the last period, we've been discussing with the International Monetary Fund in an unofficial manner. Tunisia will resume negotiations with all international donors and organizations. The health situation was a major handicap for economic growth. The situation will certainly improve in the coming period.
The governor of the Apex Bank forecasts the growth of several sectors, such as tourism, mining and exports. He also says that olive oil production will rise to 200,000 tons.
According to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Tunisia needs the support of its foreign partners to improve the financial situation in the last 2 months of 2021 and to provide external resources for the 2022 state budget. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, Nigeria is working at boosting economic ties with Cote d'Ivoire in an effort to create jobs for youth in both countries. This comes after the second edition of the Nigeria-Cote d'Ivoire Bi-National Commission meeting, which was held in Abidjan. CGTN's Tese Makinde reports.
Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, says the collaborative efforts with Cote d'Ivoire would also go a long way to address migration of youth from both African nations. Osinbajo co-chaired the meeting with the Ivorian Prime Minister, Patrick Achi. He noted that as the countries have two of the largest economies in West Africa, more cooperation is required. The chair signed agreements that cover agriculture, digital economy, education, prevention of human trafficking, among others. Part of the agreement is that both countries should learn and collaborate in trading agricultural products internationally. Both countries lead in the production of some agricultural commodities like cocoa and coffee. In addition, Nigeria's Vice President says the countries are working on strengthening military ties and working more closely in maintaining peace and security of their region in order for business activities to thrive. Tese Makinde, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
An update on what's happening in the world of sport after the short break, including the winners of the New York Marathon on top of the world following Sunday's wins.
How would you create your legend? On the fields,